All right, welcome back to the No Morning Show here on TTT. It's just about 18 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for rejoining us. And we have with us this morning economist Dr. Vanus James, because, of course, on Friday, the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Colin Imbert, announced that the budget 2022, will be read on October 4th?
Somewhere like
October, I think, right? So, of course, we wanted to get into it. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We had a budget of 49 plus billion dollars last year, and just trying to see if that's going to be decreased with all the variables that we have to consider. So, good morning to you, Dr. James.
morning, morning,
Thank you so
morning,
much for
Natalie.
joining. So, budget 2022. Let's just start with looking back a bit on 2021, because we still have a lot of things, a lot of measurables or deliverables that were announced in the last budget presentation that are yet to come on stream. Do you believe this is going to affect what we will get in 2022?
Well, you should, if you measure the performance and you underperform and you know what you're doing with the budget, then underperformance in 2021 and 2020 for that matter should lead to an adjustment of your costs in 2022. And the budget is a major tool to achieve that adjustment. If you look at the 2021 budget, the most important thing about that budget is the theme of the budget. The government said it wanted to establish foundations for innovation and growth. The way it said it is it would reset the foundations. Back when they brought out the Vision 2020, they got the essential elements of the principles right, in the sense that we need to shift away from oil and gas towards that set of industries, towards in the Vision 2028, a new set of industries. But the critical characterization that we need is to this set of industries that can produce capital so that they could facilitate innovation and growth. Capital production is the engine of growth in any economy, anywhere in the world. If you look at China, you would see that.
Well,
That's what.
we saw from last year's presentation where the government spoke about the ease of doing business, the digitalization of the economy and services. They also spoke about incentives for the agriculture as well as the construction sector. So I think we saw those two coming to fruition, and an attempt to deal with the digitization or digitalization of the economy with the setting up of a new ministry and trying to, put certain services on stream. But when we look at that and we measure that against the pandemic and how it has been able to affect, the delivery of goods and services, reduction in jobs, reduction in salaries, in revenue earnings, and then still talking about higher food prices and all of these other variables, are we going to be able to see that innovation and that turn in the economy that is so necessary and needed right now?
Well, ease of doing business is a consequence. Ease of doing business is a consequence of the institutional development path of the economy. It doesn't just get fixed by a few things you say in the budget. You've got to fix governance, first of all. That's the most important mechanism, because all of the institutions of government must respond. So you've got to fix that. And then you've got to fix banking to facilitate your development agenda. You've got to fix the way the tax system works and so on. So there's a whole range of institutional arrangements that you need to fix. And as far as I could see, we're making no progress at all on governance, for sure. And that has nothing to do with digitizing government. It has to do with setting up mechanisms through which all the stakeholders of the country can have a say in what has to be done, can give the information to the public, to the government, about what they want done in order to achieve the goals that we are thinking about when we talk about transforming the economy and
But
achieving
what
growth.
is it that needs to be fixed with taxes and banks, though? You said that they need to fix the banks and fix taxes. What are you thinking when you say that?
Well, on the banking side, if you're going to support the production of capital, which is the main thing, and you're not going to get growth without expanding the production of capital, and in particular, expanding it for export because the country is small. So if you want to produce capital on a viable basis, whichever form you're talking about, education, healthcare, the creative industries, any one of them, you have to export the bulk of the output because viability requires that you target the external market rather than simply the internal market. And you're going to need development banking to bring the credit to them in order that they can undertake the scale of investments required to make a difference to the way the economy performs, and in particular to the capacity to innovate. We're making no progress on that at all. Anyway, neither in Trinidad nor in Tobago. So that has to be sorted out. Secondly, on the tax side, you remember what you have to do is calibrate the tax rate to deal with what is the requirement to generate net savings in the private sector, as well as allow government a sufficient budget surplus to contribute to the savings of the country that will allow us to be able to validate the investments we undertake to achieve the transformation. So I have not seen any evidence that we have worked out the calibrated tax rates we need. And in particular, in the context of COVID.
Dr. James, as a result of people just not being able or pushing back whenever the minute the government says taxes, we have a pushback because you're talking about a balancing act. The ability of the government to be able to deal with those taxes so that, as you said, it can have a good source of revenue and deal with all the issues that we complain about that we need fixed, the education, the healthcare, the creative sectors. But the reality is that as a people, we want the end result without putting in the work.
Well, I
Because
don't know about that.
but we see even the pushback to the revenue authority. We see the pushback to the collection of land and building taxes. Where
I don't know about that at all, Natalie. That may be the Prime Minister's interpretation of the country, that we're all deviants and villains. But the people of Trinidad and Tobago, in a proper governance framework, in which they have a say, a routine say in how we govern ourselves, they will face up to the responsibilities. We do all sorts of things. We run businesses that these are not all being run on an negative platform. People will pay the taxes appropriately if it is clear to them that these taxes will support the agenda of development of their society. And I am not aware at all of any evidence that establishes that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are hostile to appropriate taxation. I mean, you see it everywhere. Workers
well,
pay
we
their taxes
I see it.
routinely.
I have seen that. I mean,
Where is that evidence? I have never seen it as an economist practicing it.
the success of the act the success of the act the tax campaign was because the people didn't want to pay it. What else do you think was responsible for that?
Well, that's a political agenda in the context of a poor governance structure.
Hmm.
That's you cannot get gold out of a governance arrangement that's designed to give you bronze. We've got to make the government representative so all the voices can be heard properly. And in that context, proper communication can be made, and everything doesn't have to be turned into a massive political agenda, but with one party in a zero-sum game outputting the other. That is what you saw with the Axle tax, and that's what you're seeing now with any initiative by the government, even with respect to things like the vaccines.
Yeah.
So the problem is that we have a governance arrangement in place that is inappropriate to the challenges of development. We need to make the government representative rather than authoritarian. And that is the
What do
problem.
you think? What do you think will have to change constitutionally to treat with that? Are you suggesting that we may need representational politics because we saw the People's Partnership try to introduce that, and again the pushback from the population?
Well, I wasn't properly done. I was alive and well at the time when that was being tried. It was, first of all, misconstrued in terms of uh, the way you elect the representatives. The issue really that the country faces is that the executive is too dominant in the parliament. You need to reform the parliament so that the representatives of the people who are not in the executive can be the majority of the parliament and can set the agenda and instruct the cabinet as to what to do. That's the most basic reform that is required. And then
And
we
you
need
able
reform
to
of the Senate to allow that to make sense.
And you think if we're able to achieve that, where the executive has less power in the parliament and the representatives who are elected has more, that will we will see some differences in how goods and services are delivered by the government?
Everything will change. Policies will be better, first of all. Policies will reflect what the people want. So they will be better in that main sense, which is what democracy is about. And secondly, because you are protecting workers better, every stakeholder has better protection. People bring their shoulders to the wheel and do the work required. This is a authoritarian government structure we are trying to operate in a world today that requires representative democracy to be the norm in the society. So we have got to face that. And of course, governments that win office in anywhere in the Caribbean that I see are hostile to that idea. We're faced with a fundamental problem there. But if we can
Yeah,
persuade
because it's
ourselves to
difficult to
make the
say
change,
that
we're in
it
good
does
shape.
seem to be something that's unique to Trinidad and Tobago, because what happens is you have a system of first past the post system that allows, whomever gets the most votes to take up government and then have that executive control. So who is going to make that change where the members of parliament and the parliamentary system has more control? Who's going to vote for that? In the first place, you need that kind of constitutional change. It's definitely going to need a majority. So how are we going to get there?
Well, it's a collective responsibility. The more we bang our heads up against the wall as a society and face the fact that we're not going anywhere the way we are organized now with respect to development, then the more people will rally to the idea that we need to change the way we organize ourselves, the way we govern ourselves.
All
So,
right.
so the who is all of us, really.
Yeah.
And the political parties have to face up to it. We're going to make signals every year to the society on that issue until we get it sorted out. And
Yeah.
that's true across the Caribbean, and not just true in Trinidad.
So last year we saw this budget of 49 plus billion dollars. Do you expect that the overall budgetary budget will be less or more, given where we are and how the pandemic has affected things?
Yeah, given the challenges of COVID and the kinds of things that the government has to do to make concessions to the need to address the exigencies of COVID, I would expect if you're keeping the recurrent budget somewhere near where it is now, on the development side and on the emergency side, you're going to have to increase what you're spending. So therefore, the budget would more than likely have to grow, and borrowing will have to grow to facilitate that because you're not going to get the taxes required to support an increased budget. The government has to move away from the preoccupation with the debt to GDP ratio and grow the amount of spending in the right ways, putting the money in the right places. It's got to fund some tax deferral, for example. The small businesses and the medium-sized businesses are all under pressure with respect to their capacity to meet even the 2019 tax obligations. Government has to come to grips with that, and instead of facing tax default, put a proper policy in place to fund the deferral of the tax, provide a better amnesty than the government has already put on the table, a better design,
You
and
raise
let's
that, Dr.
deal with
James,
that.
because I know for a fact that you have some SMEs who've been asking for a tax holiday. Of course, you know that there's a tax amnesty in place now, but you know what they pointed out, that the tax amnesty just allows people who owe the government taxes to get some kind of leeway to pay up those taxes. But they're asking, in light of the pandemic and in light of the fact that their revenues have been so depressed, that get those VAT refunds in, pay out the VAT refunds, but give us a tax holiday as well where we could catch ourselves, because all the loans and stuff and what they had put in place with the banks don't seem to be working. So if we recognize that this is where we are now and that the SMEs are kind of struggling, we still have a curfew in place, we still have a state of emergency in place, and coming up on the December holidays, and with a budget to be read in under a month, how are we going to be able to traverse the next 6 to 8 months with this kind of situation?
Well, the government has to listen to the customer here. The customer is right in this particular case, especially. The businesses found themselves with a crashed economy, crashed cash flows in 2020, running into 2021 with all the lockdowns that were reasonable and necessary. So the ability to pay 2018 and 2019 tax obligations that ability was destroyed. Now, either you give what they may call a tax holiday, I would say you need a deferral. You need to push the taxes back and provide room for people with a loan package in mind, better calibrated loan package than the government has offered, although it's in the right direction with the loan package. The scope needs to be different, and the design needs to allow for those in need, those who make the case that they want it, to take advantage of it. But once you tie that together with a deferral package, you then have to borrow enough to fund that. If the government does it that way and listen to the customer, then we are on track. And that's kind of what you mean when you say you need to hear the voice of the people.
Yeah.
So I think that should be done. I think if I were the Minister of Finance, at least on that front, because I'm not going to get the taxes, I would wise up and adjust to what the small bit, and not just the small business community, it's the business community that's impacted by COVID negatively. So that may be small, it may be medium size, it may be large. You have to listen to all of them coming to the table and making their proposals
I
and
think we
asking for
saw
relief.
an from I think we saw an effort from the Minister of Finance during last year's budget presentation, as I said, an additional $500 million into agriculture, all taxes off a lot of agricultural equipment, and we also saw uh, tech the devices and stuff that we have to use. That there was a reduction on taxes there, and so I think those things can make a lot of difference. But are you thinking that we need to go even beyond those incentives to get the kind of structure that we need?
Yeah, because it's not agriculture that is the central issue, really. I mean that helps with food security issues and so on. But the central issue goes back to the theme of the budget, which is that you want to keep the development options of the economy open. In other words, all the businesses that want to invest in either upgrading their capital stock or producing capital to facilitate the upgrade by others, and these are in our case service capital, not hardcore, except for PAN, not physical capital. All those businesses need to be brought into the loop properly, and you have to set policies to facilitate them. So a tax break for agriculture might be useful at this time in the light of, and I'm not sure agriculture is that heavily taxed anyway, in the light of the exigencies. But when you think of the development options of the country and the development needs of the country that you have to preserve, you need to look beyond agriculture and beyond even bringing back the property tax and think through what are the real requirements for the transformation of the economy by building our capacity to innovate and compete in the local and global markets. That's the critical issue. And that's about expanding education for export, healthcare for export, just like the minister was saying a couple of years ago, what he was trying to do with the Cuba Health Hospital. That is the kind of thing you have to double down on and plan to export the healthcare. The same for Tobago, for example. Tobago has to be a prime uh, piece of real estate in that regard. For education export, for healthcare export, for the export of music and entertainment and so on, all the service capital forms, and not excluding sport. You have to think through what that requires, the
Yeah.
capital injections needed through loans for them, and then you push all the supplementary issues like agriculture to back that up. But if you don't get that core right, at the end of the 2024, 2025, we'll be back to square one.
Let's hope it's not so. But Dr. James, we have to leave it there. But thank you so much for speaking with us this morning.
You're welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Dr. Vanus James, your economist, speaking with us. We have to go to a quick break, but stay with us. Much more coming up in the program.